I'm so pleased to welcome you to what is our 4th annual National Conference on Sexuality, Integrity in the University. Well, we have a very full evening planned for you tonight. In just a few moments, I'll introduce our moderator for the conference, who's also a very good friend of the network, Dr. Christopher Tollefson, and he'll be offering some opening remarks to set the context for the discussion this weekend. We also have our first place winner for the essay contest that we sponsored this past spring, Justin Hawkins, who we've asked to share his paper, his winning essay, with you tonight to help introduce the theme for tonight's keynote address, which is namely the effect that the sexual revolution has had on young men and women today. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Anthony Esolen, will then elaborate on this theme with his talk entitled The Person as Gift. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Dr. Christopher Tollefson. Dr. Tollefson is professor of philosophy at the University of South Carolina, and this year is also a visiting fellow to the James Madison program here at Princeton University. He has published numerous articles, book chapters, and reviews on bioethics and natural law ethics, and is author, co-author, or editor of 5 recent books, including Biomedical Research and Beyond, Expanding the Ethics of Inquiry, John Paul II's Contribution to Catholic Bioethics, and with Robert George, Embryo, A Defense of Human Life. He is the series editor for the Springer book series, Catholic Studies in Bioethics. Dr. Tollefson is both James Madison Fellow and a Senior Fellow of the Witherspoon Institute here in town, and holds a PhD from Emory University. He and his wife, also an Emory PhD, are the happy parents of 9 children. Dr. Tollefson was a speaker at the Love and Fidelity Network's first national conference in 2008, and we are very happy to have him back with us here this year. So please help me welcome Dr. Christopher Tollefson.
Thanks very much, Cassie. It's great to be here. I think this is actually the 3rd conference that I've done in one form or another. I think the first one was an Anscombe Society conference, and then there was, in 2008, also the one of the Love and Fidelity conferences. It strikes me in thinking about the 3 conferences that when I spoke at the first one, I was a father of 7. And when I spoke at the second one, I was a father of 8. And now I'm a father of 9. I hope that this conference continues for many, many years, and I'd like to be invited back, but I can't promise that I can keep pace. There will come a time. As in the past at previous conferences, it's great to see so many young people who are ready and willing and enthusiastic about entering into a conversation about love, sexuality, and marriage, and further entering into a conversation about the choices that need to be made, the social institutions that need to be created, and the cultural changes that need to be effected in order for us all to live lives of integrity and flourishing along the sexual dimension of our lives. Here are some questions that I think are essential for any conversation, any such conversation about those 3 realities, the reality of love, the reality of sexuality, and the reality of marriage. One such question is this: are these 3 realities, love, sexuality, and marriage, understood as a permanent and exclusive union of a man and a woman, are these 3 realities intrinsically and essentially related to one another? The second question is, are these 3 realities oriented further towards the procreation and eventually the rearing of children? And a third question is marriage understood in the way that I think is necessary in order to answer all of these questions? Is it also something that is essential to our common good as a polity, as a culture, and indeed as a civilization? I think that the answer to all these 3 questions is yes. I don't have a lot of time, excuse me, for giving a full answer to those questions and defending that full answer, but I will just spell out in just a couple of quick sentences how I think the answers to those questions goes, the answer that gives us a full and resounding yes to each of those questions. I think that marriage is a comprehensive union among spouses, a union that is founded on a mutual commitment to a complete and reciprocal sharing of lives of the 2 spouses. I think that the totality of that commitment is a large part of what requires of marriage that it be permanent and exclusive. And so you get a particular conception of marriage emerging from this understanding of what it is. I think that the relationship between marriage and sexuality is that the act of sexual intercourse in marriage is precisely the act that makes that total self-commitment and mutual self-giving of the spouses possible at the physical level, in the physical dimension of spouses' lives. In ordinary friendships, friendships are separated by the boundaries of the friends' lives, but in marital love, those boundaries are overcome in sex, by which spouses become, literally, I think, one flesh. And it's the orientation of sexual intercourse to children, the way in which sexual intercourse capacitates two people to do together what neither would be able to do on their own, namely, to be open to the possibility of a new human life, that's responsible. It's this capacitation that's responsible for sexual intercourse, making the spouses one flesh. Now, children are, in addition to wonderful things to have, at least 9 of, they're also our future. They're the future of our society, they're the future of our culture, and ultimately they're the future of civilization. Without marriage, they don't have a stable environment, they don't have the loving parents that are necessary in order for them to themselves become the kind of people who lovingly engage in the project of mutually sharing their lives and being open to new children who they themselves will raise and educate. Now, I think that's the story in the briefest possible way about why the answer to the questions that I asked just a couple of minutes ago is yes. And fleshing that out is, as I said, I think an essential part of any conversation about love, sex, and marriage. But I think it's not really where this conference, in a sense, starts. This conference starts at the problem that's raised by the yes answer to all of those questions. Because as everybody here knows, right, and some of us know all too well, living out that yes answer is extremely difficult in a world that speaks in a resounding voice, and sometimes very coercively, only a no to all of those questions. So, if we think about that difficulty, I think that we see that when the world encourages, as our keynote speaker will talk about, sexual chaos and describes it as sexual freedom or sexual revolution, that it makes increasingly difficult for the young and the unmarried to live with the kind of discipline and chastity that's necessary as preparation for being able to truly flourish in a good and healthy marriage. When the world encourages near marriages or almost marriages or marriage light in the form of cohabitation, then the idea of permanence in marriage and the commitment to children that genuine marriage involves are cast aside. And the consequences of that, as I think we'll see tomorrow in some of our discussions, are increasing misery and dismay for children's lives, for social health of society, and indeed even for our economic well-being. And when the culture tells us and insists upon and has us internalize an ethic of competitiveness, of individualism, and self-assertion, then even something so obvious in marriage as the virtue of forgiveness becomes one that's easy to overlook. It becomes one that's increasingly difficult to realize in the character of the spouses. And this, again, is something that we'll be talking about over the next day and a half. In all of these ways, the culture that we live in makes it difficult for us to live the yes that the answers that I identified earlier need to be lived. The culture makes it increasingly difficult for all of us. And I think that this is the starting point of this particular conference. Right? We take as established the yes to all of those questions, questions about the importance and dignity of marriage and the respect that it deserves. And we recognize that living out those answers is something that's going to be increasingly difficult for us and for our children. And so we ask ourselves, what is it that needs to be done for us to be able to make the choices that are necessary as individuals, to create the institutions that are necessary as a society, and to effect the cultural change that we need in order to be able to treat marriage and treat children, and treat love, and treat sexuality with the respect that they deserve. And with that, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to our two speakers for the evening. Our first speaker is Justin Hawkins, who, as Cassie mentioned, is the winner of the Love and Fidelity Essay Contest. I'll tell you a little bit about Justin. Justin was raised in Breinigsville, Pennsylvania, where he was homeschooled from first grade until graduation from high school. He attended Georgetown University, where he was active in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and the Alexis de Tocqueville Forum on the Roots of American Democracy. In May 2011, he graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in government and earned Phi Beta Kappa and earned Phi Beta Kappa honors. After working this year at a law firm in San Diego, he plans to pursue a PhD in political theory with an emphasis on the interplay between religion and politics in the modern era. And as I said, Justin was the first place winner in the Love and Fidelity contest with his essay, Disconnected Libido and Limitless Hedonism, the State of Sex on the Modern Campus. Immediately after Justin's presentation will be followed by our keynote speaker, Dr. Anthony Esolen. Dr. Esolen is a professor of English at Providence College. He received his bachelor's degree in English from Princeton University. He said that, incidentally, at Princeton University, when he was here, it would have been difficult or impossible to find a gathering such as this, and I think we can take that as a sign of definite progress. He got his doctorate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and since 1990 he's been teaching a wide range of courses in Renaissance and medieval literature at Providence College and has been a fixture of the college's team-taught program in the development of Western civilization. He's the author of 12 books, including the 3-volume modern library translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. Dr. Esolen has written many essays on culture and the Christian faith. If you are a regular peruser of any of the major journals of Christian thought out there, then you are inevitably acquainted with Dr. Esolen's work. Journals such as Touchstone, First Things, Catholic World Report, Crisis, and Magnificat. He and his wife Deborah and their 2 children worship at Sacred Heart Church in West Warwick, which I believe I pronounced correctly, Rhode Island. And with that, I'd like to invite Justin up here to present his essay.
Good to be here with you this evening. When I heard that I would be able to make it, I was very honored and excited, and when I learned that I'd be sharing a stage with Dr. Esolen, that was compounded. I remember my sophomore year at Georgetown, Dr. Esolen came, I was there, yeah. He came in and gave a talk about Augustine's Confessions, and he held a room of undergraduates in rapt attention for about an hour and a half, which is no small feat considering he was competing with free pizza. So, he's very impressive, so thank you very much for your work. Thank you very much. We are told that these are the best 4 years of life, visibly eager and almost impossibly energetic. The recent high school graduate fantasizes about the ideas he will learn and the experiences he will live in this new utopia without limits and free from the dreaded specter of authority figures quelling fun and life itself. College life is supposed to be experimental, or so we are told. The student steps into an unfamiliar world when he begins his career at college. And very quickly, the world without limits that once appeared so desirable becomes a source of great confusion. And in no way is this more evident than with regard to interpersonal relationships, both sexual and platonic. In its attempt at boisterous self-expression, the sexual revolution has freed us from the yoke of a thou shalt not, but has simultaneously left the modern university student with no guidance about what sex is for and what he ought to do with his desires. In examining the reasons for this strange paradox, I argue that today's undergraduates are more sexually and personally disconnected than ever before, because the sexual revolution's emphasis on self-expression has isolated men from each other and distorted the selfless use of human sexuality into a hedonic pursuit of self-gratification. The rallying call of the sexual revolution on campus today is the unquestioned assertion of the inherent goodness of self-expression. This is taken to be axiomatic. It is true of both the homosexual and heterosexual contingents of the movement, for indeed, the logic of self-expression is intentionally apathetic toward the actual content of that expression. It matters little what is expressed or how it is expressed, only ensure that the self is expressed, the tacit argument goes, and we have attained our goal. And undergirding this entire edifice is a dank and seething selfishness. For the object of these aspirations is not to be noble or brave, or to display any such classical virtues. The object is simply that the self exert itself upon the world. And under such conditions, none can claim that the self-expression of the philanderer is any better or worse than that of the philanthropist. The modern understanding of sex is also inherently selfish because it has at its root the desire for self-satisfaction above all else. C.S. Lewis articulates this quandary thusly in his treatise, The Four Loves. Quote, "Sexual desire, without eros, wants it, the thing in itself. But eros wants the beloved. The thing is a sensory pleasure, that is, an event occurring within one's own body." End quote. A more incisive analysis of the contemporary college hookup culture could not be written as succinctly. The other is merely an accessory for achieving the desired sensation. And according to Lewis, quote, how much he cares about the woman as such may be gauged by his attitude to her 5 minutes after fruition, end quote. This attitude toward the disposability of the sexual partner is not novel. What is novel is engineering social relations with the express purpose of disposable sex. And it was just this attitude towards sex and this confusion over the very essence of relationships, love, and sexuality that was enshrined at my alma mater, Georgetown University, in an event during Senior Week 2011 entitled The Last Chance Dance. Having completed 4 years of rigorous study, the senior class is presented with a week of activities as the pinnacle and culmination of their undergraduate years. The Last Chance Dance is designed as a venue to air hitherto unexpressed romantic affection toward another student or students, and the intention of it is something far less than platonic. Placed as it is strategically after a university-sponsored keg party and only a few days before graduation, the Last Chance Dance is designed as the ideal opportunity for casual hookup sex between ebullient and inebriated couples who, either for want of ambition or because of the pesky influence of sexual morality, have thus far been prevented from enjoying their allotted and expected bacchanalia. And should social awkwardness ensue after the event, no matter. Graduation and departure are only a few days away. This is the epitome of lust without romance. It explicitly and unquestionably exalts the sensory experience to the detriment of all relational and personal experience. Such an approach toward the disposability of the other stems from a false anthropology, influenced by modern notions of ascendant individualism that claim each man is sufficient in himself. This is in stark contradiction to the wisdom of the ancients. In Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes famously gives an unusual and comical speech detailing how human beings are now half of the creatures we once were. Quote, globular in shape, with rounded back and sides, 4 arms and 4 legs, and 2 faces, both the same, on a cylindrical neck, and 1 head with 1 face on each side. End quote. Such, according to Aristophanes, was the way we were before incurring the wrath of the gods and being severed from our partners. According to Aristophanes, all romance we experience is the desire to be reunited with our primordial partner, to be completed in the most literal sense of the term. The story is comical, yet it is no more so than the modern liberal notion that the human person is already a complete, self-sufficient, and entirely whole entity, less in need of outside completion than in need of a fuller and freer self-expression. And this is truly a more jarring and dissonant anthropology than anything Aristophanes could have conceived. Though we feign romantic admiration of Tom Cruise's iconic "You complete me," the modern university student is trained to be unaware that the basic longings and deficiencies that naturally exist in his soul can only be fulfilled through meaningful commitment to another. The need for basic, intimate, and faithful human romantic connection is twisted and contorted until the student truly thinks that these desires are engineered, designed would be too far baggage-laden a word, to lead him toward unrestrained, unconnected copulation, devoid of any real connection. Indeed, we pride ourselves on our ability to have intercourse and move on without sympathy or lingering attachment. It is the subject of social events and high-budget movies. For example, No Strings Attached, an unintentionally didactic tale revolving around the contract of 2 people to use each other's bodies for sexual pleasure and nothing more, grossed almost $150 million in 2011 by telling the obvious story that a man and a woman having sex together cannot but develop intimate connections that transcend mere physicality, no matter how hard they try to resist these feelings. This comes as a novel thought to the modern, liberated individualist who, blinded by his own individualism, is confused at his inability to find fulfillment in transitory, libidinous encounters intentionally evacuated of all higher significance in the revered name of self-fulfillment. But the failure of the sexual revolutionaries to be satisfied is unsurprising. When the sexual libertines from the 60s down to the 21st century speak of free love, it is lust that they speak of, devoid of agape. Love, speaking precisely, is exactly what they do not provide. Love is always costly, and those who would lightly esteem it will necessarily find themselves with nothing but the shell of love and a cheap substitute for it. a pleasurable sensation caused by the titillation of nerve endings, and then dissatisfaction. The dissatisfaction with the myth of modern individualist self-expression is unsurprising if one accepts the classical idea that man is by nature a political animal, to employ a Greek phrase, and that it is not good for man to be alone, to employ its Hebrew counterpart. Modern man's highest ambition lapses into solipsism because it springs from a false anthropology. In reality, man is at his most human when he loves another fully and selflessly. Yet by a strange paradox, he is most like a beast when he is in lust. Failing to hold himself to the highest standards of human life, he inevitably gives way to the basest. The result of this on a societal scale is that, as the 20th century British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge observed, we create, quote, impotence out of our own erotomania. The modern-day college campus, as an environment virtually devoid of any sexual mores, is an ideal laboratory in which to test Muggeridge's theory. And here we see that it holds true. The result of uninhibited sexual self-expression on campus colleges is virtually pandemic. The Georgetown Sexual Education website says that 1 in 4 college students today has some kind of sexually transmitted disease. 1 in 4. And according to the CDC, 19 million new cases of STDs occur every year, half of them being among 15 to 24-year-olds. 19 million a year, half of them between 15 to 24 years old. And much of today's scientific research is oriented not towards educating us into making better choices, but towards allowing us to continue making bad choices with impunity, knowing that science has promised to continually, steadily remove the consequences of our behavior at every turn. Yet if the dissatisfaction and frustration so endemic of the modern university is to be reversed, it is not going to come through scientific advances in increasing sexual liberation. It will come through the humble confession of our need for others and a profoundly held moral ethos of self-sacrifice and true love. Institutions such as the Love and Fidelity Network show that this desire is not fantastic, but is genuinely possible and a work most emphatically worth doing. Thank you.
That was a terrific speech, wasn't it? I wish I'd gone first, Justin. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Chris, for the wonderful introduction. Yeah, I remember being here many years ago. In fact, I took an introduction to politics class as a freshman, first semester freshman, and I sat around there somewhere. It was taught by a fellow named Fuad Ajami, who is still picking around and talking about the Middle East and such things. I remember one time we were gathered together by our resident advisor to something that freshmen were supposed to experience. I don't know why. But at this gathering, we were all talking, or supposed to talk openly about sex. And the Princetonians at that time could come to no agreement about any morality that would govern sexual intercourse, except that it should not be cold and mechanical. Until a bearded fella with granny glasses, also a freshman, this was back in the day, said, "I don't see what's wrong with mechanical sex. It could be real cool." And no one among the Princetonians had an answer to that. And I said to myself, just an Italian kid from coal country in Pennsylvania, what am I doing here? Anyway. It was very strange. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child. I figured maybe somebody would want it in case schools and television had not done the job sufficiently. It was a polemic against all the foolish and fundamentally cruel things, as I believe, that we do to our children to cramp them, to ready them at best for the hamster treadmill of contemporary life, which energetic and pointless device often goes by the name of career. I like the old meaning of career, which suggested undirected racing or careening from one wall to another. Perhaps you have some experience of this, I don't know. So in that book, under an ironically diabolical voice, I urged parents to take their children, there were these things back in the old days called children, anyway, to take them off the treadmill so that they could once again do the human things, like lie on their backs on the grass to look up at the sky. Rather than, I hear about this, I don't know, sometimes I think I live in a parallel universe, but I hear that parents are already grooming their children to get into the best preschools, you know, the finest first grades and finest finger painting. I don't understand. To look up at the sky. There's a whole glorious world out there for children to wonder at and to wonder in. It used to be called outside. And then, too, there's an even more glorious world for the children to encounter. An inside, if you will, to be found in those strange creatures called other people. I notice when I go to the drugstore to pick up a prescription, they have these ghastly things called magazines at the front. And there's always one called Self. And I'm wondering what kind of person could, without embarrassment, buy that thing, you know? Wouldn't it be nice someday before I die to see a magazine called Other People for a change? So there are these wonderful, strange things called other people, and the strangest creatures of all. Those that are like me, but not at all like me. Those with the smooth chins and gentle voices, or the broad shoulders and the steely eyes, those creatures of that other sex. How do we encounter that vast world beside us? Or that vast world perhaps sitting right next to us now? In what I think is a brilliant philosophical work called The Truth of the World, Father, you may know him, Hans Urs von Balthus, our Catholic theologian, leads the reader through an intricate analysis of what it means to be a knowing subject and an object of knowledge. It's a fascinating demolition of the project that has held modern man bound in a kind of hypnotic daze since Descartes and Bacon. For Descartes and Bacon, knowledge is power. Power is domination. It's the extraction from the object of those measurable features that we can put to our use. And any connection between that sentence and what Justin has said a few minutes ago is strictly accidental. The project is confessedly reductive. A lump of coal that I hold in my hand. I grew up in Pennsylvania. This is not a thing of mysterious beauty, its glossy black surface having been pressed into smoothness by the slow work of centuries. No, it's a coagulation of carbon, which if burned in a certain fashion will yield up a certain number of calories. Bird I see pecking at seeds in the yard is not a hen, but a protein machine, to be trammeled up in a cage and stuffed with chemicals so as to produce meat at a certain rate per dollar of feed and with a certain content of fat. I hope these examples, I could give you many more, suffice to suggest that if knowledge is reduced to that which gives me dominion over a thing for its profitable use for myself, the defect is not in the thing so used, but in the user. It's not the chicken that is blind, but the chicken manufacturer. If we're really to know a thing, says von Balthasar, we must open ourselves up to the mystery of its being. We surrender ourselves to it in humility. Its own disclosure of itself and our receptive listening to it, he says, quote, are but two forms of a single self-gift. Thus, love is essential to the act of knowing, he says, for, quote, knowledge can be explained only by and for love. And we're not even talking yet about other human beings. According to von Balthasar, we see the action of love in the structure of knowledge, most powerfully when the object of our knowledge is himself a subject, that is, a free being, who can choose to reveal himself to us and upon whose self-revelation we depend if we're to attain any deep knowledge of him at all. It's then that we see a reversal in the relationship of the subject and the object, he says. The subject, the knowing subject, far from being some kind of Baconian experimenter slicing open a corpse to disentangle its veins and arteries, is himself more clearly the patient in this case, the one who must wait upon the initiative of the object, waiting in love for a revelation that is born of love. Nor is the object of our love, revealing himself to us, the only beneficiary, he says. We can know ourselves truly only when we communicate ourselves in love. But the act of communication depends upon the reverence of someone else, someone who rejoices in the mystery of our being. So true is this, that the lover may come to know us better than we know ourselves. And he says, quote, "Many wait only for someone to love them in order to become who they always could have been from the beginning." It's very nice. I think it's quite true. It is not good for the man to be alone, as Justin says, as God says in Genesis. So the first time you may note in Scripture that God, who has been creating the whole universe, even New Jersey, sorry, I should not have put that in there. I was going to ask anybody if they knew the state motto of New Jersey, which comes from Dante. Do you know this? Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. Abandon all hope, you who enter here. I should not have said that, though. So God has been creating the whole universe, and everything he beholds is good. It is the first time he declares that something is not good. It's not good for the man to be alone. Point of fact, if the man is alone, he is not yet wholly a man. He needs another like himself. And that is when God creates woman and presents her to Adam, who cries out, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Yet Eve is not simply a different person from Adam. It's more than that. It's more beautiful than that. In the very separation of the sexes, one from the other, alike and unlike, we find, as it were, the heart of what it means to know and be known, to love and to be loved. I hope this is not too abstruse for the opening of my lecture here. I'm begging your patience. Consider the attitude of someone who has reduced knowledge to facticity that can be put to use. To know a thing for such a person is to have analyzed its measurable features so as to make use of them for profit or pleasure. Utilitarianism of one sort or another. There's hedonism at its base. Beauty is defined as what happens to please the beholder for his own purposes, not as the resplendent glory of an object's inner nature, or a person's inner nature. What will such a person think of the sexes? Imagine a debased Baconian writing a sex education manual. By the way, what a collapse in civilization it is that I can even be standing here and uttering a phrase as ugly and as stupid as sex education manual. In such a monstrous thing, right, we'll find all the tabs and slots duly labeled. That was the subtitle of one of my chapters in 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of the Child. Your child. The chapter, I believe, was titled Reduce All Love to Sex and Sex to Hygiene, or insert tab A into slot B. You find them labeled maybe in their physical functions described with a clinical detachment. That is the cover for a deep prurience, literally an itch display something out in naked facticity, so that all sense of mystery will be destroyed. Persons are not addressed, but appetites. And the parts of a machine, one's own machine or that of another, to employ in the satisfaction of those appetites. Even a stomach or an intestine would be more lovely than that, and incorrectly described as a machine. Would it be an offense to an intestine to describe it in such mechanistic terms? But here we are talking about the sexes, oriented in their physical, and I believe in their psychological natures, the one to the other, for that act that binds them to one another in the one flesh union that bridges time past and time to come. I suppose it's some consolation that, like moss poking up in the cracks of concrete, there is still some shallow-rooted attraction of one sex for the other in our day. Boys still like girls, and girls still like boys. But I'm not sure whether they enjoy the full glory of that attraction, that delight in the mystery of the other sex. Maybe never have popular magazines, those ghastly things that I mentioned before, right, had more to say about the mechanics and the superficies of the sexes, and less of any genuine sense of what a boy or a girl or a man or a woman really is. It's as if we believed that we could come to know what a hen is from studying x-rays of the poor bird fattened in a feeding cage, not that awkward and comical and even mysterious creature perching upon the coop and ruffling its feathers to the air. What effect this flattening has upon our capacity to learn anything at all, I'll discuss shortly. First, a couple of examples of true receptivity to the mysterious sex, of course, which is always that other one, the other sex. Behold two scenes from the plays of Shakespeare. Anybody here from Rutgers? Shakespeare was a playwright back in back in the day. One scene is at the court of a wicked duke who has usurped the throne from his brother and sent him into exile in the forests. His daughter and his niece Rosalind, however, are bosom friends, and they suffer together the evil that he has done. They bear it with a fine blend of youthful, let's say girlish sprightliness and sadness. So now this duke is attempting to ease the tensions of his court with some entertainment. It's a series of wrestling matches. His favorite has already thrown all the challengers, breaking the neck of one young man so that he must be carried away in danger of his life. To this court, then, the two young ladies come, actually kind of dragged there, and there they meet a handsome young man, Orlando, who is the chief wrestler's final challenger. He does not seem a match for the champion. The girls approach him, naturally, to try to plead with him. And by the way, this is comic in itself. Any time a girl comes up to a guy and says, "Please don't do this, it's so dangerous," that plea is not going to work. They give up the challenge and preserve his life. Now, in reply, this young man reveals something of himself. He, too, like the niece, is lonely. He, too, has suffered. He does not wish to deny the fair ladies any request, he says, but rather he pleads for their good wishes to go with him. It hardly matters otherwise if he loses, he says. I shall do my friends no wrong. And here I need a nice young voice instead of the thing that I have now. I shall do my friends no wrong, for I have none to lament me. Do the world no injury, for in it I have nothing. Only in the world I fill up a place, which may be better supplied when I have made it empty. At this moment, here, Rosalind is smitten. Orlando is brave, manly, eloquent, profound mystery. The little strength I have, says she, I would it were with you. So let's pause here to consider what Rosalind says. There is no silly pretense that Rosalind could actually throw a right cross and send the champion sprawling. There are no computer-generated images here. She confesses that she has little strength. How often does the slenderness of a woman's arm belie the mighty pulses of her heart? We know this. We'll witness throughout the play the strength of Rosalind's purpose, her solid good sense, and her resolute love. What strength she has, indeed, she does not hoard up for herself, but she offers it as a gift. Moved by the sympathy of the young women, a friendliness he has hardly ever experienced, Orlando embarks upon the perilous fight, and he throws his opponent. "Oh, excellent young man," cries Rosalind. He's victorious. Indeed, it's the champion who has to be carried off, unable to speak. But when Orlando reveals his name to the Duke, telling him that he is the youngest son of Sir Rowland de Boys, the Duke, constrained by his own guilty conscience, unwilling to address this human being as a human being, dismisses him curtly. I would thou hadst been son to some man else. The world esteemed thy father honorable, but I did find him still mine enemy. I would thou'dst told me of another father. So the Duke exits, incapable of love and resisting the truth. But Rosalind, now he has yet another reason to hold Orlando in high esteem. She says, my father loved Sir Rowland as his soul, and all the world was of my father's mind. Thus the beauty of a friendship we hear of, but do not see, since Sir Rowland has passed away, persists into the next generation here, and helps to beget a new love. Rosalind approaches Orlando. She gives him a keepsake. He cannot speak, but it's not a speechlessness born of physical incapacity. He's a guy from the sticks in front of a beautiful woman at court, right? He considers himself a rude farmer boy by comparison with this beautiful girl, so far beyond him. He's all arms and legs, all wrist bone and cowlick. In his very strength, and all guys know this, in his very strength he stands as if exposed to the world, his muscular courage concealing the shyness of a boy. But the girl approaches him, she with her gentle voice and her tender limbs, and she says, boldly confessing her own weakness, Sir, you have wrestled well and overthrown more than your enemies. Different scene. We're at a sheep shearing party. The country lass is the center of attention. She's dressed as mistress of the feast, but her natural shyness makes her abashed to be so. But that causes her to appear, the bashfulness causes her to appear, and this is something that we've entirely forgotten, all the lovelier in the eyes of those who look upon her, especially the young man who has pledged his love. Now, this young man is in fact the prince of the kingdom, Florizel, though he has not yet revealed that fact to the old shepherd who, as everybody believes, is this young girl's father. She knows it. She, Perdita, is the lost daughter of a king, it's a fairy tale, though neither she nor anyone present at the party is aware of that fact. She decks the guests with flowers, and in a flight of girlish desire, wishes to see Florizel strewn with blossoms, quote, like a bank for love to lie and play on. At that she blushes and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said such a thing. It must be this robe I'm wearing. Changes my disposition. And Florizel says, no, you can never be out of place. His words, what you do still betters what is done. When you speak, sweet, I'd have you do it ever. When you sing, I'd have you buy and sell so. So give alms, pray so, and for the ordering of your affairs to sing them too. When you do dance, I wish you a wave of the sea, that you might ever do nothing but that, move still so, and own no other function. Each your doings, so singular in each particular, crowns what you're doing in the present deeds, that all your acts are queens. As I believe one of the profoundest expressions of love in all of literature, not because it focuses upon the feelings of the lover or upon the stripped body of the beloved. As mysterious as a wave of the sea, so mysterious and lovely are the movements of Perdita when she dances. Florizel whimsically imagines Perdita singing as she does the most mundane things, because when she sings, that's all he ever wants her to do. But his words cause us to see and hear Perdita doing just that, as if when she buys and sells, when she gives alms to a beggar or orders some groceries, she does sing, though only the lover can hear the melody. Now, you cannot, I think, generalize from Perdita. There are no abstract laws that will account for her actions and dispel the mystery. In this regard, she's like all human beings. except that her extraordinary goodness and innocence throw that mystery into high relief. What she does, again to quote Florizel, is singular in each particular. It's that never-to-be-repeated singularity, the beauty of the existence of this particular woman that reveals her to the eyes of her lover and causes him to exclaim that all her acts are queens. He knows Perdita. He cannot ever come to an end of knowing her. He does not, in fact, at this moment know that she is a princess, but indeed he does know it, though that is not something that can be known in the sense of a fact that is logged and dispensed with. Even a sunset or a tree, as von Balthasar says, is always more than itself, not less. And that's all the more true of the beauty of a virtuous woman beheld by a virtuous man. Now, I hope it'll cause no controversy to note that in both these scenes, the sexes are not interchangeable. For what is interchangeable is of no importance. We're indifferent about things that are interchangeable. I can interchange one battery in a robot for another, precisely because the particular battery does not matter. And in this regard, I can change one partner in a hookup for another. Mechanical metaphor reveals much, precisely because I am utterly indifferent. It doesn't matter. There's also no sense of beauty attached to what may be replaced without harm. We don't say, if we're listening to an air by Mozart, we don't say that the beauty of a particular run of notes depends upon their being replaceable with any old run. We say instead that the art is so well crafted, we can't imagine it otherwise. We don't wish it otherwise. We're overcome with astonishment and gratitude that it is what it is, nor can we come to an end of fathoming its beauty, its very being. And so too with Rosalind and Orlando, with Perdita and Florizel. It's not simply that we can't reverse the sexes in these scenes without lapsing into absurdity. Orlando falling in love with the lady wrestler and giving her a necklace to wear in his honor. Ma'am, you have wrestled well and overcome more than your... It doesn't make sense. It's rather that these characters in the depths of their sexual being cannot cease to fascinate us if our hearts are open to the truth. Each is, in one sense, unveiled to us. Perdita is the essential young woman, gracious to everyone, yet passionately in love with a fine young man. But in that unveiling, there is revealed to us the existence of always more profound mystery. There's always more and more to know, more that yet dwells behind the veil. Says the shepherd father about Perdita and Florizel. They're dancing together. He speaks to Florizel's father, who is in disguise, checking up on his son. Says the old man, and he's just shepherd, so I'm going to pretend he's from Tennessee. If he do light upon her, she shall bring him that which he not dreams of. She shall bring him that which he not dreams of. Thank you, Jed. That pronoun that, in its very indefiniteness, is the closest the old man can come to the inexhaustible goodness of a woman as pure as Perdita. What is that which he not dreams of? If heaven is, as Dante puts it, to live in loving, necessarily, then heaven is both the answer to our dreams and that which we cannot dream of. Jesus, New Testament, right, says, "Seek and ye shall find," but the converse is also true, that they who find the truth in love shall seek all the more, in that reveling in the depths of love that unites knowledge with the joy of a small child dipping his toes into the vast ocean beyond. For the lover, that is to say, for the soul that has found the truth and fallen in love with it, there is never an only in his thought, but always more, still more. Perhaps this is the meaning of that mysterious saying of Jesus, that to them who have, more will be given. But from them who have not, I'll say from the programmatic reducers and deniers of this world, for whom only is almost the only word in the lexicon, those who say that a man or woman is only a creature with certain insignificant organs, or only a set of culturally induced prejudices, from them who have not, and who do not wish to have, who find nothing, and therefore seek nothing, even that little they have will be taken away from them. So I hope you'll see then the connection I wish to draw between a healthy imagination and the readiness to delight in the goodness of each sex, rather than to scorn it, to ignore it, to pervert it, or to pretend that it does not exist. For God has given men to women and women to men, I believe I'm speaking as a Catholic now, not only to prolong the species, but to open our minds. So then, keeping in mind the mystery that each sex presents to the other, should present if we are really looking, the mystery of maleness and femaleness that runs, von Balthasar says, like a fissure through the whole animal world, that presents to us in a most potent way the fact that genuine knowledge must spring from love, as fruit springs from the flower. What then will be the virtue that honors that mystery? What will that virtue have to do with the growing awareness of man and woman for one another, and with the development of their minds and souls more generally? What's the role of a teacher or school, or even, Lord help us, a college, in the encouragement of that virtue? Let me say at the outset, the virtue I'm looking for is not abstinence, not even temperance. I might well abstain from eating rich food because I'm training for the wrestling arena. I might abstain from sexual intercourse because I do not wish to be saddled with a debilitating disease, such as we have heard of. As they used to say in the old army videos in World War II, don't let this happen to you, right? If we learned that Orlando had been preparing for the wrestling match by a dietary regimen, that would add nothing to our esteem for his youth and manhood. If anything, it might undercut the power of the match, which is a public revelation not of the strength of his body so much as the honor of his being. He is, as he says, the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boys. Florizel assures Perdita that she's nothing to fear from the merry sheep shearing, nor need she be embarrassed by their costumes, since even the gods took on various shapes for love, though their loves were not so chaste as his, says he, since my desires run not before mine honor, nor my lusts burn hotter than my faith. And suppose he had said to Perdita, hey, you needn't worry about me, since I've kept myself clean, you know. What would that make him in our minds, if not a petty calculator of advantages to himself and a man unworthy of Perdita's surpassing beauty? Now, when we possess something holy, it's not enough to say that we don't hire it out for use. It's what we do with it, and not what we decline for a time to do with it, that defines the proper virtue. We cherish it, we give it due reverence, we keep it veiled in our hearts, not because we're afraid of it or ignorant of it, but because we know that no public presentation of it can ever do justice. We ourselves cannot fathom its profundity. The virtue that honors what is holy, especially as it is veiled and made manifest in the bodies and the hearts and the minds of man and woman as woman, is not abstinence, it is purity. Abstinence is defined by absence and refraining, but purity is rather an essential light radiating from the core of the holy. Suppose we owned a masterpiece by Caravaggio, my favorite painter. Let's say the Conversion of St. Paul. We would not say, we must exercise abstinence with regard to this painting and refrain from spitting upon it. Rather, we should be ashamed to dishonor it, so it would not occur to us. We would wish to keep the work in its special place, in a certain sense hidden from the common vulgarities of the day, precisely to guard it, to honor it, to veil it, and to reveal it in its own special light. Purity does not deny the power of sex. Rather, it rejoices in that power. Precious little rejoicing seems to be going on in the campuses that Justin has described. It's impurity that degrades and denies and despises. Consider again the scene between Orlando and Rosalind. Now, suppose a modern actress were to game the scene, and this you see in Shakespearean productions nowadays, which is why I don't bother with them anymore. Game the scene by writhing with physical desire, laying herself in a sense naked to the audience, but in actuality extinguishing the radiance of her sex by the smoke of lust. She would immediately put us in the position of jaded sophisticates who know everything there is to know about the attraction of these two young people, which is to say, not much at all. Or consider the scene between Florizel and Perdita. Suppose A modern actor, while saying, "Nor my lusts burn hotter than my faith," were to slip his hand underneath Perdita's gown while she gave a little appreciative squeal and pushed his hand away. The audience would surely laugh. It would be the knowing laugh of the ignorant, the hoodwinked, the cynical laugh of those swaddled up in their own savoir-faire. Critics would praise the direction as edgy, which is another word for dull. For the dabbling in impurity does nothing but obscure. We might laugh, but we would not be invited into the interior castle of love. There would be no interior. It would be all exterior. But I don't mean to say, in being all exterior, it would at least have the virtue of being honest. Quite the contrary. It would rather be utterly dishonest, utterly untrue to reality. For when I say that purity guards the sanctuary of sexual being, I don't wish to cloud it with incense so as to deceive the unwary. That mystery genuinely exists. If we attend to it for but a moment, we'll see that this is so. Every cell of my body is inscribed with the masculinity of my being. Quote, as Jesus says, "The very hairs of your head are numbered," and we might well add that they are numbered as man's hairs or as a woman's hair. The two are not alike. Within the woman's body is the womb, the haven of all new human life. Within the man's body are the seeds needed to fructify the egg in that womb. Each of us carries within ourselves precious and unique strands of the history of the whole human race. When my father and mother were married, they were both of them virgins. They gave themselves to one another wholly, having reserved themselves to one another alone. In the church they pledged their troth, but in the secret chamber of their love, they conferred the sacrament upon one another. They did what their mothers and fathers did, and their mothers and fathers before them. They engaged in the act of marriage. They engaged in the act of life. And from out of the billions of possibilities they bore within their bodies, I was born. Creature came into being, bound to the far past and oriented toward the future. A baby whose mind, like that of all children, already bore the potential to become vaster than all the rest of the physical universe, and whose soul, as Christians and Jews affirm, was rooted in the absolute being of God and oriented towards Him as towards its ultimate love and joy and fulfillment. If this is not a mystery, then nothing is. If this does not warrant the guardianship and care of purity, then nothing does. And if this is denied, if this is splayed out and dissected, if this is reduced to mere facticity, as if we could arrive at the essential beauty of man and woman by means of forceps and calipers, then I say that the very possibility that young people may attain wisdom is severely curtailed or destroyed. There's a parallel between the reduction of truth and the reduction of love. Consider that the young people on our campuses bear within their bodies a tremendous gift, whereby they cooperate, as I would say, as a Catholic, with the creative power of God. Or if the phrase strikes you as controversial, whereby they are united with all of the time past and potentially united with time to come. Consider the essential meaning of the unveiling when a man and a woman give themselves to one another as man and as woman, that is, as begetter and conceiver, as the bringer of life and the shelter of life, as the sower in the field. Now strip away that meaning, separate the act from its biological truth. Separate the body, now considered as an instrument, like a hose or a funnel, from personal being. Deny the manhood of the man and the womanhood of the woman. What remains? Not love, not joy, not even mirth, joy's hillbilly cousin. I like mirth. Don't see very much of it these days. What remains is the itch of hedonism and the utilitarian calculus to scratch the itch. Now let's take the argument one step further. I'm almost done. The denuding of our sexes and the losses we incur is but the most disappointing part of our denuding the world. It's hard for me to imagine someone who smirks and sneers at the purity of Florizel and Perdita, but who looks upon an orange blossom with wonder. Perhaps it's possible. All kinds of human contradictions, I suppose, are possible. But it would be a contradiction. Eventually, they who deny that there is any special beauty in man and woman, and who deny that this beauty is a precious gift from one sex to the other, They will deny the beauty of much less obviously beautiful things and the profundity of much less obviously profound mysteries. The libido dominandi, Augustine's phenomenal phrase, the lust for domination, is also a libido despicendi, a lust to look down upon things, lust to deny. We say that love is blind, but I prefer the wisdom of Richard of St. Victor, who said, ubi amor, ibi oculus, where there is love, there is an eye to see. It is instead the lust of domination or the lust of despising, they come to the same thing in the end, that casts a film over the eyes. It prevents us from seeing by teaching us that what is apparent to our eyes is all there is to see. So it may well be that the greatest harm caused by the sexual revolution, of all the harms that's caused, might well be called the asexual revolution, by the way. The substitution of antisepsis for purity and a latex balloon for the bridal veil. It may well be that the greatest harm is not physical or political, but intellectual and spiritual. Yes, there are now millions of children born out of wedlock, and millions more who will not know all their lives long the complementary love of a mother and a father bound to one another. Yes, it has resulted in neighborhoods laid bare to the predations of bad men. Yes, it has supplanted the freedom-making vitality of the family with the freedom-consuming and deadening protection of the state. All these calamities, I believe, ought to be condemned. We ought to strive against them and for the health of the family with all our might. But in the meantime, let us also note well the souls of the young people around us. What brings them wonder? The poetry they read is splayed out, its nerves numbered and labeled. This here is a patriarchal construct. This here is a capitalist ganglion. This here is the locus of social class. Philosophy is resolved into logic or lame empiricism, hobbling after the big boys in the natural sciences and pleading to carry water for them on the sidelines. Those scientists themselves are harried masters of reduction, hectically competing for a grant here or a laboratory there. The social sciences have abandoned the careful and loving study of mankind, and they desire instead to exert their own mastery by the application of theory to all things human. I say that they suffer from hyperthyroidism, caused by swelling of the thyroid gland located at the base of the spine. And young people swim in this pool. They get drunk, they bed down, they cram for tests, they learn how to use the master tools, they write reductive papers, they sport their credentials, they get hired. What is there in all this mad rush to dominate that rightly bears the name of love or truth? I wish to leave you with another scene, my last scene. Didn't take place at a college. I don't know whether it could take place at many a college. It was at a state park in New York. I was recently married. I was on vacation with my wife. We had a quarrel, so we were in a foul mood. She'd gone off to phone her mother to tell her where we were staying. And as I waited for her, I looked out at the field in front of me, and there stood a young man. He was a Mennonite in a white shirt and black knickers. He was well-built and handsome, and he was smiling and speaking in an animated way. Evidently, he was an Italian Mennonite. To a young woman seated on a bench in front of him, she was dressed in a light blue gown, and her hands were folded in her lap. And she was smiling too. They had eyes for one another alone. I thought for a moment I'd walked into an alternate universe. I hadn't walked into an alternate universe. That's the real world there. That world that honors the mysterious beauty of the sexes. That is not imaginary or distant. It is genuine. It is near, if we would but open our hearts to receive it. If we do, I dare say, we will not simply set ourselves up for a happier marriage and nicer children. I think that may be true. But we don't practice the virtue of purity for what will help us obtain. We practice it because it's right and just. The reward comes from the virtue itself. We'll not only see the sexes in their beauty, we'll become the sorts of people who delight in that vision. We'll become, I say, the sorts of people who may behold the lowliest thing, say the chicken on the fence, or the orange blossom on the tree, and enter into the mystery and the truth. Thank you.
really love your concept of this mystery and how, this delight in learning about another person. But I wanted to challenge you about your ideas about the nature of a man and a woman. Now, I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but I really want to hear what you have to say about this, because when I was listening to it, it sounded like what you were doing is linking the sexuality of a human being with the way that they actually are in how they act and who they are, as in their identity, right? So I'm wondering what, I guess, makes a man and a woman, because if you're saying that all these sort of characteristics, like the example you gave of the Shakespeare characters,
Yeah.
sort of the way they reacted to one another, are simply based on their sexual organs.
They're not based on their sexual organs.
Okay, because
They're based on their sexual beings.
their sexual beings.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to see whether you would take some of an essentialist perspective, or what you think of sexuality versus gender as like a socially constructed idea. What is that? How does that play into your discussion?
Feminists who put out that word essentialism have set up a straw man, right? Is as if they were saying, or as if they were saying that their opponents were saying, that once we know the sex of a person, then we can tick off all of the characteristics of that person in a list. But of course, this is nonsense. Nobody that I know, none of the great poets who talked about the love of man and woman treated them in that fashion. Okay? This is a straw man. This is a piece of bad logic. In fact, the very idea that the sexes are mysterious to one another prevents us from making a list of such things. However, it does not prevent us from noticing. All right? Not to say that any of these things can merely be encapsulated. We can't do this, can't play this reductive game, right? All men are aggressive, all women are passive. We know that that's not so. But if we look at men and women in love, if we look at them with love, we'll see that even the headstrong woman is a headstrong woman, and not the same thing as that guy over there. It may take us all our lives long to puzzle out the myriad differences, okay? But what a joy it is to encounter those differences, right? So if somebody says to you, just because you cannot make a universal statement, for instance, all men like to play chess, therefore, all right, you can make no reasonable statements about the sexes at all. Well, that's nonsense. That's a piece of very bad logic. Okay? And it's part of the same reductivism that I'm reacting against. On the other hand, okay, I'll give you an example, okay? I used to, I may still yet, I don't know, I'm getting old. But I used to, for my freshmen in our Western Civ class, okay, when the first quiz came around, and then afterwards too, if they dared, I used to say, okay, you guys, they're all scared to death at this first seminar, you know. Who is this guy? Why am I here? I'll give the whole class 100 on the quiz if you can beat me arm wrestling, okay? And this, of course, immediately humiliates the loser, right? And that means that he's mine forever. But the students think that it's something funny and grand, and of course, I always win. I actually lost once last year. I'm going to give them all a hug. Now, do you actually think that we could comb the universities of the entire world for the next 500 years and find a single female professor challenging her female students to arm wrestle her for 100 on a quiz? It's not going to happen, okay? And people say, when it might happen? No. It's a comical example. I think the right attitude to take towards the sexes is the attitude of respect before a great mystery, okay? Are there aggressive women? Sure, we know them. They're aggressive women. The shy men, yes, we know them, but they're men. There's deep mystery there. And I have set my heart and my pen against all the reducers of our time. So what the feminists would try to do would be to cast me as a reducer. I'm sorry. Then you really don't know what I'm saying. Okay. These are creatures of splendid and multifarious beauty. All right. And they still remain, yes, men and women. Hey, the very organization of my brain is different, people tell me. I don't know. Maybe that explains why I whistle and throw my dog up in the air. And my wife, she wouldn't do that. I don't know. She does better things than that. Other questions?
What is your view on the idea of soulmates, or the idea that just one human being is meant to love just one other human being?
The Aristophanes idea, okay, basically, right? That we wander through the world seeking the other half, which is a comical but also a very sad little allegory. I speak only for myself here, really. I don't want to press this too hard, because maybe I'm not wise in this regard. I don't know. I think that the idea is dangerous. And my way of thinking goes along these lines. I hear sometimes people say that they're waiting for the right person to come along, Mr. Right or Miss Right, whoever that may be. I know no such person. All I know are these fascinating, complex, and very fallen human beings. Okay? Nobody ever says, my ambition in life when I'm young here is to make myself into Mr. Right. It never goes in that direction. I wonder why. My wife, I'm giving her a plug here. She believes very strongly about this, more strongly than I do. Okay, that part of love is the forbearance, the forgiveness of those things that you may see in the other person, on the surface perhaps, which are not necessarily to your liking. And the willingness simply to give yourself. And she recommends a very fine movie, it's a very comical and sweet movie, called, I believe it's called People Will Talk. It's a Cary Grant movie, in which Cary Grant plays a physician who marries a young woman in trouble. Basically what he says is, she's a good young woman. I wasn't thinking of getting married, but she needs me, and I can love her. And it produces a wonderful marriage. Maybe we should just stop looking for someone to meet a checklist of qualifications, okay? After all, if a checklist of qualifications is necessary for entry into paradise, we're all staying in New Jersey then. I would ask always what love, genuine love, would say about the matter. And leave it at that. I don't want to press it too hard, because I know that some people might disagree with what I'm saying here. I'm not entirely sure of myself.
Well, thank you, Dr. Esolen.
Thank you, Cass.
Many of the students who are here this weekend are looking to both intelligently articulate their commitments to marriage, family, and sexual integrity on campus, as well as generate the type of culture that would lend to the realization of the commitments that they articulate on campus. I would ask you that perhaps besides reading poetry and literature, what you would recommend to these students as a way of, or rather I should say in addition to reading poetry and literature.
We want to get rid of that rather there.
What you would recommend to our students as far as promoting and encouraging the type of culture that would lead to the type of clearer vision of the mystery of the opposite sex?
You know, it's a good question. You might be able to think of more practical measures than I can because you're much younger than I am. I think in relation to this question, I think of the wonderful word silly. I think I've talked to some of my students are out there, by the way, about this word before. It's a wonderful word. In its Middle English significations, it meant innocent and blessed. But it was also coming to mean foolish and silly. See the original meaning in the German word selig, which is the same word selig meaning blessed. What I don't see on our campuses enough of is simple, silly fun. That's not one of the highest virtues, according to Thomas Aquinas, but it's a virtue. I was told by the students I drove down here with in a rental car that there are things called parties, at which apparently there is the imbibing of alcohol and very loud music so as to prevent someone from talking to someone else. In such a situation, there is no silliness. There is no flirting. There's not even the innocent delight which one sexual being can take in the presence of a person of the opposite sex when nothing beyond silliness is intended by either one of them. If you could make the sheer fun, the mirth, that hillbilly cousin I mentioned, okay, easier to aim for than joy. Joy comes as a gift. But mirth we can get on our own some of. If you could do those silly things with one another, in one another's company, clearly enjoying one another's company, as girls, as boys, men and women, that would be immensely attractive to a lot of people. Now, there would be some people who look upon that and say, silly people. Like a twice-divorced person at age 50, poking the ashes of her Marlboro onto her Shih Tzu dog or something. Yeah, I believed that when I was young, Ducky. I was in love too, and I know what comes of that. You should run away from such people because they don't know. They're total ignoramuses, okay? There will be some people who look upon this and say, what stupidity, But that is an example of a very, very grave sin, as Christians believe. That would be the sin of envy, which is the hatred of someone else's spiritual good. Spiritual good. To see someone enjoying a spiritual good, even mirth, and to despise it, is to be caught in that hellish sin of envy. And there's a sense in which all the ancient poets say that, pride is the root of all evil, but envy is right there with it. Okay? But there will be a lot of people who will say, you guys can despise them all they want, but they seem to be having fun. And I am actually not having fun here. So maybe the open door is, but I kind of still like to talk to people of the opposite sex and do that Italian thing like flirting, Maybe, okay? It doesn't have to be complicated. Just the simple, ordinary, and extraordinary things that boys and girls and men and women used to do with one another, beside one another, for one another. Okay? You must see this already among some of your fellow students, right? And they see you if you are churchgoers, for instance, and you are celebrating something with some abandon and glee, not the television show, which is apparently miserable, but real lightheartedness and silliness in my sense of the word. And they say, gosh, I don't have any of that. I could use some of that. That's what I would suggest. But you can think more than I can. You know, ice cream, I don't know. But I would say don't underestimate the power of mirth.
It seems you're very, very taken away with sort of the beauty of all sorts of things. You know, great artwork, Caravaggio is awesome.
Caravaggio.
You know, but this seems to be the quintessential question. Is not. I mean, people here are taken away with beauty in one form or another. Maybe it's not literature.
Are they?
These things. Hopefully, you know, at some level, I think people here really are. But when we go to these college campuses, we're dealing with people who really, they don't see it. And, you know, I'm studying Plato right now, the Meno, for example.
Yeah, sure.
And Socrates is asked, you know, how do we teach these people to see this beauty, to really be taken away with it? And, you know, the answer for him is something, you know, it's hard. You know, we don't always understand what clicks with it. How would you recommend conveying this message, this beauty in, you know, all things, you know, especially in marriage, right? You know, but, you know, in all things, you know, you have a whole worldview that really appreciates the beauty of things, as Von Balthasar says. How would you convey that to people who really don't see it? Because I think I agree with you. We don't see it in this room enough. How are people outside who don't see it all? How are we going to get to them?
Well, it's a good question. It's a wonderful question to end the evening with, I believe. And I'll just go back to what my old friend Richard of St. Victor says. He's a medieval Benedictine mystic, great influence upon Dante's Paradiso. And he says, ubi amor, ibi oculus, which is a defiant reversal of the old wisdom that love is blind. Love is, in fact, sight-producing. It gives you vision. Without love, you see nothing, right? This is part of the severe intellectual cramping of the souls that Dante meets in the Inferno. They don't love. Therefore, they don't see. Now, if our relationship to beauty is one of appreciation and love, a love that then allows us to see even more beauty, I don't think that is meant to be solipsistic, and I don't think it's meant to be solipsistic in Plato and Aristotle either. So it may be that you help someone else, and this may sound simple, but maybe the answer is simple. You help someone see beauty, not by means of intellectual argument, but by love. That is, your love for the person whose eyes are kind of clouded with the contemporary disease or mist. And you say, well, what kind of answer is that? I mean, that's it, perhaps. Very few people, I'm told, are ever brought to a conversion of heart by an intellectual argument. Maybe it's some mathematician out there somewhere, right? Oh, I see, checkmate, yes, okay. Well, where do I sign? How do I get baptized? It doesn't happen that way. People are rather brought to truth by other people who love them. That seems to be what people have told me about their experiences. And now I think, old as I am, I have begun to accept that fact. That I'll have much greater influence upon my students, not by the arguments that I make in class so much. We hate to say this to professors who want to think otherwise. But by condescending, actually deigning to love them. That might be it. They need to be loved. I mean, look, they're at Princeton. They need to be loved. Maybe it's not more complicated than that.